Hello everyone, and welcome to the program. By stalling and refusing to sign the Paris Agreement, the United States clearly showed its intention to bring the B-52s to bomb Hanoi. The Americans believed that if Hanoi was bombed by B-52s, it would obediently sit at the negotiating table like a dog and accept whatever agreements the U.S. proposed. That is why, at that time, the U.S. confidently encouraged its soldiers by saying, flying into Hanoi would be nothing more than a stroll in the eastern night. At an altitude of 10,000 meters, the enemy would never be able to reach them. All they had to do was press a button and return to base safe and clean. This was perhaps one of the most nonsensical encouragements of the U.S. military at that time, because they had no idea that Vietnam had been preparing to fight the B-52s for over a decade. Thanks to the great foresight of President Ho Chi Minh, in 1972, the U.S. brought the B-52s to attack Hanoi to gain an advantage at the negotiation table. However, as early as 1962, President Ho Chi Minh had already met with Comrade Phung the Thai and said, "Now that you are the commander of the Air Defense Forces, do you know anything about the B-52? Comrade Phung the Thai was hesitant, but Uncle Ho continued, "I'm just saying, even if you knew now, you couldn't do anything yet. It flies at an altitude of over 10 kilometers, while all you have in your hands now are anti-aircraft guns. But from now on, you must closely monitor and regularly pay attention to this B-52 aircraft." Because of President Ho's far-reaching strategic vision, the People's Army of Vietnam was not at all surprised when the U.S. brought the B-52s to attack Hanoi. To understand more deeply about the 12 days and nights of Hanoi's battle, a battle that made the whole world admire the military strength of Vietnam, we must return to 1965, when the Soviet Union began supplying the People's Army of Vietnam with SAM-2 missiles, radar, and anti-aircraft guns. Once the Soviet aid arrived, the future of shooting down the B-52s became brighter than ever. But that was only theory for the future, while the reality of the battlefield was an entirely different story. An anti-aircraft missile site had to be equipped with a lot of radar equipment and missile launchers. This made it very easy for U.S. aircraft to detect, even if there was a way to conceal the sites from the naked eye of the pilots. The act of launching a missile would immediately reveal the position of the People's Army of Vietnam, simply because when a missile was fired, dust and debris filled the sky, and that could never be hidden. Everywhere a missile was launched and smoke and dust rose, the Americans would bomb that location, causing the People's Army of Vietnam heavy losses. The question now was, to shoot or not to shoot? If they did not shoot, the U.S. would completely dominate the skies. But if they did, their positions would be exposed. That was why the People's Army of Vietnam applied deception tactics, creating many fake sites to completely confuse the Americans. All of these fake missile sites were built from pressed wood. From above, they looked no different from real ones. Whenever they wanted to fake a missile launch and create a dust cloud, the People's Army of Vietnam simply detonated a bomb. From the air, the U.S. could not distinguish between real and fake sites, because there would be 3 places with identical smoke clouds. Thanks to these fake sites, the U.S. wasted countless bombs on targets made of wood. After bombing, pilots returned to report to their commanders that they had destroyed several missile sites. Yet strangely, the next day when they flew past, they were still being fired at by missiles. This drove the Americans crazy in their attempts to counter the missiles of the People's Army of Vietnam. They had underestimated Vietnam as a backward, rural country. They thought that since the People's Army of Vietnam had only received missiles in 1965, it would take at least until mid-1966 to learn how to use them. To quickly prepare to destroy Vietnam's missiles, U.S. aircraft were fitted with metallic strips on their wings to jam radar. This made it impossible for the People's Army of Vietnam to pinpoint their exact position for targeting. So how does radar jamming work? The principle of radar is to transmit electronic pulses. When they hit an object, the pulses reflect back to the source. By calculating the distance between the time of transmission and reception, important parameters can be determined to locate an object in space. Thanks to radar, the exact coordinates of aircraft could be obtained and missiles launched to destroy them. However, if the radar signals were jammed, the target could not be located. and missiles became useless. Understanding this principle, the Americans used a method once employed by the British against the Germans in World War II to attack Vietnam. Specifically, they released thousands of metallic strips while flying. This made it extremely difficult for the People's Army of Vietnam to know the real coordinates of the aircraft. Not only that, the U.S. carefully mixed different sizes and shapes of strips to interfere with multiple radar bands. According to calculations, 25 strips of metal would appear as one aircraft on radar screens. Therefore, whenever they flew, the Americans dropped thousands of strips. And radar operators, also called trackers, could not tell which was the real plane. The People's Army of Vietnam had deceived the U.S. with fake missile sites. And now the U.S. deceived the People's Army of Vietnam with countless fake planes. The problem now was how to solve it. Could Soviet or American manuals solve this? If not, would the People's Army of Vietnam be defeated by the U.S. right at the second step? It seemed as though these sophisticated American tricks required great scientists to counter. But no, it was only complicated for the Americans. In the hands of the People's Army of Vietnam, it was as simple as playing a video game. When released, the metallic strips could never fall as fast as an aircraft. And if it was windy, they fell even quicker to the ground. Therefore, radar operators only needed to stay calm and wait a few minutes. The real coordinates of the planes would then appear clearly. At that point, when missiles were launched, the aircraft could not escape. The problem seemed solved, but with their ever-creative minds, the Americans challenged the People's Army of Vietnam again with a different type of radar jamming. The bomber formations flew in front, while behind them, 2 X-66 planes circled in the sky to jam the radar. If it was just metallic strips, the People's Army of Vietnam could calmly wait a few minutes to determine the coordinates. But with this type of jamming, the longer they waited, the worse it became, causing even greater losses. If the interference could not be locked onto for missiles to target, it was extremely dangerous. So, how did the People's Army of Vietnam solve this problem? Please stay tuned for the next episode. Remember to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon to receive the earliest videos. Subscribe to channel to watch the latest content.